tonight, a new vision for the Territory's education system, but do they have the money to pull it off? Cheques to become a thing of the past as the federal government embraces a more modern financial system. The ultimate betrayal, the ASIO boss reveals a retired politician was recruited by international spies. And the Matildas book their tickets to Paris with a 10-0 thrashing of Uzbekistan. Good evening, Kyle Dowling with ABC News. The Territory Government has unveiled a major overhaul of the NT education system, scrapping middle school and attendance-based funding. But the devil is in the detail, something the government doesn't seem to have much of when it comes to the rollout of the sweeping changes.
A new vision for education and a promise to one day phase out middle schools in the Northern Territory.
We'll see those schools turned into comprehensive schools. So instead of just being middle schools, they'll move to a comprehensive model.
Some of the concerns for us is that the transition from middle to secondary means that some students don't go on to senior secondary.
A long-awaited review of secondary education recommending sweeping changes to the NT's current school system and more options for remote students to complete high school in the Territory.
Having a boarding facility at Nullarbor, boarding facilities at Katherine, then we'll have Tennant Creek.
And a concession that the NT's controversial funding model based on attendance rather than enrolment was leaving students worse off.
And have our schools been disadvantaged? My answer is yes, they have been.
The NT Education Department's review of secondary education delivered 15 recommendations, including more support for learning on country programs and additional resourcing in classrooms. But while the government's plans are ambitious, one major problem isn't going away: a critical shortage of teachers.
We have an education system that is really hurting. We have burnt out teachers, we have a teacher shortage, really crisis right now.
The union supports the government's vision, but without confirmation of federal funding, there's no concrete timeline on when the reforms will be delivered.
We're really not going to see many timelines being agreed to by the department on anything that costs money until that bilateral agreement process has finalised.
Big changes that won't come cheap. Samantha Dick, ABC News.
A cloud of suspicion hangs over dozens and possibly hundreds of former politicians across Australia after the revelation one has been a spy for a foreign country. The head of Australia's top security agency, ASIO, has revealed the figure sold out their country by joining a wider plot. But with no name and no clarity on whether he or she was a federal or state politician, public demands are being made for more information to narrow down the traitor. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
Inside a building of secrets,
welcome to ASIO.
A tantalising glimpse into a clandestine overseas spy ring.
Right now, there is a particular team in a particular foreign intelligence service with a particular focus on Australia.
The ASIO boss revealing how operatives dubbed the A-Team successfully cultivated a former Member of Parliament several years ago.
This politician sold out their country, party, former colleagues to advance the interests of a foreign regime.
With attempted infiltration into the highest levels of government.
At one point, the former politician even proposed bringing a Prime Minister's family member into the spy's orbit.
But when challenged to identify the unnamed culprit...
I'm not going to name the individual. We're a rule of law country.
Instead, Mike Burgess noted that tougher foreign interference laws had been passed since this episode.
Personally, I don't think they'll be stupid enough to repeat what they've done in the past.
The intelligence chief says his decision to publicly call out the A-Team is part of a real-world, real-time disruption, letting the foreign spies know that their activities here have been uncovered. But his decision to not identify the former politician is generating a furious guessing game inside this building, as well as demands for more information.
The former politician who sold out this country could be in this building right now. Why won't you name the traitor now?
It's a matter for the Director-General of ASIO. If he was to choose to name that.
I've said I have a fair idea and I'm being careful about what I say publicly because of that.
There absolutely would be benefit though, in ensuring that not all former politicians carry some sort of smear or smirch upon them.
Let's not get offended because we're talking about national security matters. It is clearly in the national interest for this to be the subject of national discussion.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a great pleasure.
A very public discussion of work that's usually hidden in the shadows. Andrew Green, ABC News, Canberra.
Senior Northern Territory Police have rejected Zachary Rolfe's allegations of racism within the force as the inquest into the death of Kumi Walker nears its end. On day 4 of intense questioning, the officer who fired the fatal shots has been questioned about the night of the shooting. And a warning, this story contains the image of an Aboriginal man who has died.
Returning to court to relive a night that sent ripples across the country. Former NT Police Constable Zachary Rolfe is questioned for a 4th long day about the 2019 shooting of Kumi Walker, defending the decision to jump the fence and enter House 511, where he fired 3 shots, telling the coroner family members outside should bear some responsibility. The fact that they did not tell us, and I know this is an incredibly hard time for the family, but there is a responsibility that has to be borne by not telling us that Kumi Walker was inside that house. I accept that's hurtful, but this is about the truth, and that's the truth from my perspective. The coroner also heard had Mr Rolfe told his superiors he was on medication, he may not have been deployed to Yuendumu at all. The then constable was on medication with side effects including seeing or hearing things that others do not and losing touch with reality. But Mr Rolfe says his dosage was so low his doctor believed he wouldn't be affected, conceding we'll never know what impact, if any, the medication you were taking impaired your conduct on the 9th of November. Correct. Senior Northern Territory Police also filed affidavits with the coroner today rejecting Mr Rolfe's earlier allegations of widespread racism within the elite Territory Response Group. They noted annual TRG awards are handed out, but that a so-called Nugata award was a made-up word given to the person who displayed the most caveman-like behaviour throughout the year. The court heard the award was renamed in 2022 following a thorough review of the TRG unit. By then, the unit was a lot better educated and more sensitive to the impact of perceptions and misunderstandings from the Walker coronial inquest. None of the awards have any connotation to race. The awards are not meant to be offensive. Mr Rolfe was acquitted of all charges in 2022 and will continue answering questions tomorrow when the inquest is expected to wrap up after 18 months of evidence. Melissa McKay, ABC News, Alice Springs.
The National Corporate Regulator has issued a chain of homeware stores with locations across the Northern Territory and other parts of the country with an interim stop order over concerns its practices are causing financial harm to First Nations consumers. Urban Rampage first came under scrutiny in 2022 when it was revealed ASIC and ACCC were investigating issues raised about the retailer. Now financial counsellors want to see lasting changes in the sector.
It's a store which describes its target market as predominantly Indigenous consumers who are receiving Centrelink. Now, the corporate regulator has thrown the book at Urban Rampage, ordering its parent company to temporarily stop using the government-administered financial tool CentrePay to sign up customers on credit agreements.
This is selling goods without making sure that the people buying them can afford them. It is not reasonable for First Nations people to have their money gobbled up by this business and leave nothing for food or other essentials.
With 10 Urban Rampage stores across regional and remote towns in the Northern Territory, Queensland and Western Australia, ASIC said it was concerned that Urban Rampage's consumers are vulnerable, at risk of financial hardship, and many may currently be experiencing financial distress. And it will continue working closely with financial counsellors to understand the impact being felt by the retailer's customers. Anglicare NT CEO Craig Kelly says he's encouraged by today's development.
It's a good decision. It's been some time coming, but it's an important step to protect vulnerable community members.
But Mr Kelly is concerned this may prove to be just the tip of the iceberg.
Would not be surprised if there are other providers or businesses out there that are behaving in ways that aren't in the best interest of the community.
ASIC estimates more than 10,000 Urban Rampage customers have been impacted, including over 5,000 who were signed up at the Alice Springs store last year. The interim stop order will last up to 21 days, with the owners now given the opportunity to make submissions before a decision is made whether to make the ban permanent. Lee Robinson, ABC News, Alice Springs.
A Chinese-Australian businessman who once ran as a Liberal Party candidate has become the first person convicted of a foreign political interference offence. Sonny Duong was jailed for 2 years and 9 months today in Victoria's County Court. The court heard the 68-year-old had been in contact with Chinese intelligence officials and was secretly working to advance the aims of the Chinese Communist Party. He was found guilty of attempted political interference over this donation to a Melbourne hospital in 2020, alongside former MP Alan Tudge. Prosecutors claim Duong was trying to influence Mr Tudge, who he believed could one day be Prime Minister. There's no suggestion Mr Tudge was influenced or committed any wrongdoing. Duong could be released in 12 months. The President of the Philippines has used a landmark speech to Australia's Parliament to declare he will not back down in territorial disputes with China. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is spruiking increasingly close security ties with Australia as the two nations signal they'll expand exercises in the South China Sea. Here's Foreign Affairs reporter Stevenjits.
A once battle-scarred nation grappling with new forms of conflict and searching for allies.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the Republic of the Philippines.
It's not a war, but the Philippines and China are at loggerheads in the South China Sea.
The Philippines now finds itself on the front line against actions that undermine regional peace, erode regional stability, and threaten regional success.
With Beijing using its Navy, Coast Guard and even militias of fishing boats to try and force the Philippines out of contested waters.
For many years, the Philippines has been on the front line, subjected to grey zone activities.
That's angered President Marcos, who's edged closer to the West, using his speech in Canberra today to send a clear message on foreign soil.
I will not allow any attempt by any foreign power to take even 1 square inch of our sovereign territory.
Australia's drawing closer to Manila too. Last year, the two nations held their first joint military drills in the South China Sea. Today, signing a new agreement to boost maritime cooperation.
Freedom of navigation is fundamental to our sovereignty, our prosperity, our security.
We must come together as partners to face the common challenges confronting the region. Not one single country can do this by itself.
The President's speech was unusual. Most Southeast Asian leaders want to avoid making a choice between the US and China and would never dream of using language like he did. But Beijing's aggression is hardening resolve in Manila. That creates more of a risk of open conflict, but it also opens new opportunities for countries like Australia. Stevenjits, ABC News, Canberra.
The Supreme Court has agreed to hear Donald Trump's claim he should be immune from prosecution on charges of trying to overturn the 2020 election. The Conservative Majority Court will hear arguments in April, a move which calls into question whether the case could go to trial before the November election. At the same time, an Illinois judge barred the former president from appearing on the state's primary ballot because of his role in the January 6 Capitol riot. But she delayed her ruling due to the Supreme Court hearing. It came as one of the most powerful figures in US politics, Mitch McConnell, announced he was stepping down, potentially ceding more influence to Donald Trump and Republican hardliners.
To lead my Republican colleagues has been the highest privilege. But one of life's most underappreciated talents is to know when it's time to move on to life's next chapter.
The federal government is phasing out cheques by 2030, embracing a more modern financial system. But banks are running well ahead of that timeline, with one major bank no longer processing cheques from this week. Older and lower income Australians say they're being left behind as banking moves online.
pensioner Michael Coogan uses cheques to pay his rent.
We don't do any banking online because we're not familiar enough with computers. Computers don't figure largely in our lives.
Banks say cheques are costly to process, even more so as fewer people use them. It's a cost that'll shift now to Mr Coogan when his bank stops issuing cheques this week, and he'll have to begin paying a fee to pay rent.
Every cent counts. And to all those 33-year-olds and 34-year-olds out there, one day you will be 43 and 53 and 63 and you'll discover that your income shrinks.
National Seniors Australia fear vulnerable people will be left behind as banking goes digital.
So the banks have got to really just make sure that, you know, as a system, that they are providing support to the entire community, not just the cohort that have mortgages.
The use of cheques has dropped 90% in the past decade, now making up less than 1% of all transactions. The federal government admits phasing out cheques will affect older and lower income Australians, but has promised an inclusive, gradual shift. Tenants Queensland is worried the end of cheques will push more people onto fee-charging third-party platforms.
In effect, the agents are subcontracting their rent collection requirements and also cost shifting onto the tenant. It just makes sense that you shouldn't be charged for paying your rent.
The Australian Banking Association says its members are supporting customers to transition to easier, more accessible ways to pay.
I'm not comfortable with it. I know by the number of cheques, other people aren't comfortable with it.
But they'll soon have to get used to it. Jessica Black, ABC News.
Coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, could cost of living hurt the federal government at this weekend's by-election?
I mean, you're sort of worried about what the future's going to be like.
I got 6 children, but it's so difficult.
Mortgage relief right now, interest rate reduction right now, cost of living relief right now.
It's a seat the government needs to hold.
Also, comedian Hannah Gadsby joins me to discuss their new show.
A major survey has found 1 in 8 people on dating apps have been approached by predators trying to target their children. The research by the Australian Institute of Criminology found in most cases, parents were being asked to facilitate the abuse or exploitation of their own children. Men and women were targeted equally, with researchers believing male predators may be posing as women in some cases. The Institute's Deputy Director, Rick Brown, says 2/3 of those approached were offered payment for photos, videos or live streams, while others were asked to provide inappropriate detail about their children. A territory-wide program to help detect rheumatic heart disease in children has returned to Alice Springs. First Nations health workers and cultural advisors will visit 11 schools over the coming fortnight, highlighting the signs of rheumatic heart diseases to children. The program, run by Deadly Heart Trek, is hoping to examine 800 to 1,000 kids for the disease, which has disproportionately high rates across the territory and is particularly prevalent among First Nations communities. The program also pairs cardiologists who will show local health workers how to operate machines that can test for the disease. While Australians grapple with a cost of living crisis, for many young Japanese, moving down under is a financial boom. Plagued with low wages and economic hardships, Japan is now officially in recession. So Japanese workers are flocking to Australia in record numbers.
Armed with a small camera, Shoma Tanaka talks candidly to his social media followers about his earnings, expenses and, most importantly, savings.
It is definitely easier to work in Australia. The hours are less than in Japan and the pay is higher in my case, so it's much easier mentally.
Since arriving in 2019, he's worked a variety of jobs. Currently, he's at a metalworks factory, earning twice what he would back home. On his YouTube channel, Shoma explains how the higher income, combined with a bit of frugality, has helped him save $200,000 and buy his dad a new car.
If there are people who are working and feeling a bit frustrated in Japan, I'd like to let them know that there is a path to choose, a working holiday, and there are possibilities for them.
Japan has slipped into recession as the country battles a weak yen and an ageing, shrinking population.
I feel the cost of food is going up, and I'm shocked how much the power and gas bills cost lately.
I'd like to give more and more back to my employees. However, in reality, while the cost of goods and expenses are rising, it's impossible.
The number of Japanese applying to work in Australia has hit record levels as people seek sanctuary from low, stagnant wages.
There is a very strong incentive for Japanese people to, work outside for a certain period and earn money and then come back.
It's not all bad news. Major Japanese firms are posting record profits and the stock market is back to all-time highs. What many workers here want to know is when this good news will flow through to their wallets.
I'm worried about my life. From my point of view, Japan is declining.
Those economic headwinds may take a long time to subside. James Oaten, ABC News, Tokyo.
To finance now, and retail sales bounced back in January, and retailers helped push the local share market higher today. Here's Alan Kohler.
Retail sales rose 1.1% in January, a decent recovery from the 2.1% decline in December. But as you can see from the chart, the big picture is that the amount being spent in stores and online has levelled off after the big rise coming out of the pandemic. And what's more, that rise was all about prices. This chart separates retail sales into volume and value. The volume of shopping has been flat for 2 years, but values have increased by almost 10%, and that's all price. Retailers had a good session on the ASX today after Harvey Norman beat expectations with its profit result. And other results were well received as well, including the hospitals group Ramsay Healthcare, Macquarie Technology and Star Entertainment. The US market was down a bit last night. Iron ore fell 2%. And the Aussie dollar was steady just above 65 US cents. In other news, Bitcoin has hit a new record high in Australian dollars. It's still about 20% below the 2022 peak in US dollars, but the Aussie dollar has devalued 13% in the past 2 years, so Australian crypto punters have been bigger winners. Meanwhile, the price of carbon dioxide emission allowances in Europe has fallen by half in the past year because emissions are falling and the demand for certificates that let companies emit has also gone down. But the price of the Australian equivalent is rising for the opposite reason. Companies are buying more Australian carbon credit units to cover their higher emissions. And that's finance.
The Sydney Kings' hope for a three-peat in the NBL is over after going down to the New Zealand Breakers 83 points to 76 in last night's qualifier in Sydney. Parker Jackson Cartwright finished with a game-high 34 points for the Breakers. The Breakers will now play the Illawarra Hawks after they lost to Tasmania. The Jack Jumpers progress straight into the playoffs after a 16-point win. Tasmania will face the Perth Wildcats next weekend. Rejuvenated Matildas striker Michelle Heyman is proving that age is just a number, with her 4-goal blitz against Uzbekistan rocketing her into Olympics contention. The 35-year-old's performance was the exclamation mark in the Australians' 10-0 drubbing of the Uzbeks in Melbourne last night, handing coach Tony Gustafsson an even tougher task of selecting the squad for Paris.
After a night to remember for Michelle Heyman, you could barely wipe the smile off her face.
So it was just a really sweet moment to be able to, score a 4. Just wild.
Heyman says the past week has been an emotional rollercoaster. 5 years after retiring from international football, the veteran's comeback couldn't have gone better.
A lot of people told me that I couldn't do it, you're too old. So it's really nice to be able to show people that it doesn't matter how old you are.
Heyman's heroics helped the Matildas book a ticket to Paris. The real test will come against the world's best.
Can she bring the pressing intensity and the game out on the field when you have less time and space?
But I do believe in my ability, and I know how hard I've been pushing myself to, get here, but I'm not stopping.
Opportunities ahead of the Olympics will be thin. Australia plays Mexico in April before 2 yet-to-be-announced send-off matches in June.
When we go to governments these days and say there's a Matildas match, they get snapped up pretty quickly. So hopefully it's in a few different cities.
And competition for spots will be fierce. The squad must be cut from 23 to 18.
It's always been cutthroat, and I think that's the nature of, the Matildas setup.
Gustafsson says creating chemistry is key.
So when I select a squad for Olympics, I might leave some players out of that roster that is better individually, but it's about building the best team.
Katrina Gorry has hinted the Olympics could be her farewell.
For most of us, it's probably, could be our last major tournament. So I think, to go out with a bang would be pretty amazing for all of us.
Gorry looking to the future.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Alongside her daughter, Harper. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne.
The leap year day only comes around once every 4 years, an extra day in February to synchronise the calendar year with Earth's orbit of the Sun. For those born on the 29th of February, there are pros and cons of being a leapling, fewer birthdays, but the opportunity to be forever young.
Dongara man Bill Kearns has reached a milestone a little later than most of us. It's his 21st birthday.
21 today and I haven't caught a cray, but tomorrow's another day.
But age can be deceiving. The retired cray fisherman has a few years under his belt, with almost 30 of those spent working on boats. He was born on the 29th of February 1940, 84 years ago. But because it was a leap year, his real birthday only comes up every 4 years.
I was a bit upset because other kids were having theirs every year, and I thought, what's going on here? And then as I got to grow older, then my mother explained to me what was happening and I got to accept it.
At 21, Bill still loves getting out on the water. These days, with the help from his mates.
It's blowing a little bit outside, so we're going in the harbour to do a bit of crabbing. And now I'm just recreational fishing with a couple of pots to catch a few crays because I accidentally didn't know it, but while I was doing all this, I fell in love with the sea. And the sea's got the salt waters in my veins. The proof is in the pudding. You gotta wait, but there it is. There's our first crab.
Over the years, he's gathered a few tips and tricks on how to stay young.
I'd rather be out here doing something in the daytime than sitting home looking at the bricks in the wall. I got notice there's 21 on the card, so I'd rather stick with that. I feel younger already. Good.
Turns out the leap year birthday isn't so bad after all. Alice Angeloni, ABC News, Dongara.
And now it's time for the weather, and tonight's viewer pick from Stokes Hill Wharf has been sent in by Jess Legg. Showers and storms developed across much of the Northern Territory today, with most forming during this afternoon. It was 34 in Darwin as well as Wooramayunga today. Zooming out, 34 the top in Katherine, Maningrida reached 32, 34 in Jabiru. 37 degrees for Alice Springs, 42 in Yalara and Tennant Creek, 29. The satellite is showing scattered showers and thunderstorms across the north of the country, some storm clouds about the south of WA as well. There's a large area of low pressure stretching across the northwest of Australia, and a cold front is moving into the Tasman Sea and extends a trough through South Australia. Looking interstate tomorrow, 24 degrees and partly cloudy in Hobart, a top of 26 in Melbourne, 32 degrees for Canberra, partly cloudy and 30 for Sydney, 31 at the top in Brisbane, 29 degrees for Adelaide and a sunny 34 for Perth. Back in the Territory, Alice Springs, 31, heavy rain and a possible storm, 38 and possible showers for Yalara and 29 degrees for Tennant Creek. Further north, showers and 35 in Katherine, 33 the top in Borroloola and 32 for Nhulunbuy. And to the west, 35 in Jabiru and a chance of a shower or two with a top of 33 in Darwin tomorrow. There'll be a morning high tide at 8:51 and a low at 2:39 in the afternoon. The sun will rise tomorrow at 6:48 and set at 7:10. And looking ahead for Darwin, showers and possible storms were more likely from tomorrow. Those conditions expected to continue most of next week. In Alice Springs, possible storm and heavy rain tomorrow, though that's forecast to clear from the weekend, with the chance of rain becoming less likely. And we'll have an extended edition of ABC's Northern Territory News tomorrow night with our monthly State Line features. Join us for an exclusive interview with NT Opposition Leader Leah Finocchiaro as she outlines her party's vision should it win the next election. And staying with us now, Sarah Ferguson is up next with 7:30. Good night.